First webinar, how to develop a test strategy for ServiceNow. It's really lovely to have you all here today. My name is Georgie and I will be your host. As you know, our panelist today will be Paul Chorley, CEO of AutomatePro. Paul has 25 years of experience in delivering and testing in IT systems. Today, he will be covering what a test strategy is, why it is important to have one, what it should cover, how to use a risk-based prioritization matrix to prioritize your tests, how to break down test strategy objectives to suit your test plan. Throughout the webinar, we'll have a series of short polls alongside some audience question breaks, one halfway through and one at the end. You can submit your questions in the questions tab. The webinar is being recorded, so there's no need for notes or screenshots. You can just sit back and enjoy. Without further ado, it gives me great pleasure to welcome Paul.
Hi, Georgie. Thanks very much for that lovely introduction and welcome. Let me just make sure that I've got all my settings here correctly, and maybe you'll be able to see me as well. There we go. Fantastic. There's all sorts of bits to click on. Let's start the presentation. Thank you very much, Georgie, again, as I can welcoming us and setting the scene for this webinar. Really delighted to have you join us today. It's afternoon here, but I know we've got people joining us from the US, so good morning to you. People from Europe, from Africa, and even I think there are some people staying up very late, or should I say very early in the morning in Australia and New Zealand. So thank you very much for taking the time and trouble to join us. Hopefully you'll find the content really exciting and enjoyable and very practical in terms of what you're going to learn today. Just in terms of a little bit of scene setting, the reason why we're doing these webinars is that in the course of talking to prospects and customers about AutomatePro and our solution for ServiceNow, it became clear to us that there was generally a kind of a lack of understanding about testing in general around the ServiceNow platform. So we started to think about how we could put together all of that knowledge that we've built up over, the many years that we've been doing this in a series of workshops or webinars where we could share that best practice with you and that that knowledge and learning that we've got and share that with a wider community. And we've been bowled over actually by the number of people that have subscribed for the webinar, and I can see lots of you joined today, so thank you very much for that. And it just shows really how much people want to know about this topic. Testing, DevOps, automated testing is a really interesting area, but it's very unique when you're doing that on a platform like ServiceNow. It's different from other applications that we've, if they're built from the ground up. And we think that actually that's an area where there's a lack of events and knowledge and webinars. So much so that Georgie has a really exciting announcement later on. So please wait until the end and we'll share that announcement with you. So the webinar series that we've got for you starts today with the very highest level, the test strategy. So we'll talk about that today, and there's a very nice download as a kind of free offering from this session. And again, Georgie will provide details at the end how you get that that download. That is a test strategy template document that you can use. You can tailor it, configure it to your own needs. So something again very practical that you can use as a result of this webinar. Webinar 2 will be go to the next level down, which is the test plan for ServiceNow. Then webinar 3 focuses on how to upgrade ServiceNow. It's singularly one of the biggest problems that people come to us with, the challenges around upgrading ServiceNow. We've done it hundreds of times for lots of different customers, and we know the best way to do it and to make it really painless and easy. So that webinar will focus purely on that. We've boiled it down to 6 easy steps. Webinar 4 is all focused around ServiceNow, testing of ServiceNow interfaces. We get asked this question a lot. How do we go about testing interfaces between ServiceNow and Salesforce, or ServiceNow and Oracle NetSuite, or whatever, whatever the platform, or a bespoke web platform? So we thought it would be good to have a whole webinar on that, share our best practice, share our experiences, and let's have a dialogue about how we can share and learn amongst ourselves how best to do that. And then the final webinar in the series will be around how you can test some of the tricky bits that no one really likes to talk about in ServiceNow, things like virtual agent email notifications, all the little, the nasty bits, and we'll share our experience of how you go about testing those things. So hopefully you join us for the webinar series, but today we'll focus on the test strategy. Let's start right at the top and work our way down through that. So we're going to start straight away. I'm just going to gauge the temperature of the people on the webinar with a quick poll. Georgie, hopefully you'll be able to start the poll for me. And the questions that we want to ask you is, what do you know about test strategy? You know what it is? Yes. You don't know what it is at all? No. Or you're not sure, you have some idea, but you want to confirm that today. So if you could start the poll. Looks like that started. Doesn't take long to click on that. So Georgie, should we stop the poll there and have a look at the results? Okay, so we've got 56% say yes, they know what a test strategy is, so that's good. Hopefully today's session will confirm that, or maybe you'll add to your knowledge. 7% have no idea at all what test strategy is, so that's good. Hopefully you'll learn a lot from today. And that 37%, it's very small on my screen, are kind of not sure. So that's good as well, because hopefully you'll be able to sort of confirm that with what you learned today. So hopefully Georgie's moved on now from the poll. And so they say you never forget a good teacher, and I had a really good lecturer at university who I always remember because he taught me lots of really good things. And one of the things that he said was that before you answer any question, make sure you understand the keywords and the definition of the keywords in the question. So I'm not talking about the what is a, but the keywords in this phrase are test. So what does a test mean? Let's just make sure we all understand the definition of that word. I think we probably all know that, but Wikipedia obviously is great now. We don't ever turn to the Oxford English Dictionary for definitions anymore. We go to Wikipedia, and Wikipedia tells us that a test is something that is either true or false, and also a test, it has an expected result. So different from an experiment, apparently, which has an uncertain result. So we know what a test is, and what is a strategy. So what does strategy actually mean? And I always think that strategy is one of those words where you sort of think you know what it means, but actually when you try and describe to somebody what strategy actually means, you get a bit tongue twisted and don't really know how to describe it. So again, let's go to Wikipedia. What does it say? Wikipedia says it's about setting objectives and priorities, which is useful because we can now make sure that our test strategy covers the key objectives and what the priorities are for our testing. A definition that I like is taken actually from the military. In fact, the word strategy comes from the military originally. It defines it says, how do you mobilize your resources to achieve a goal, is the military definition. And I really like this definition because we all know that we don't have infinite resources in the ServiceNow arena. We have constrained test resource. We have constrained time to do testing, whether that be for an upgrade or for a release. Cost is always, money is always a constraint. So we've got constrained resources, and strategy is about how we mobilize those resources in the most efficient way to achieve your goal or your objective. So we're starting to work out what strategy actually means. It's about optimizing your use of resources to achieve your goal. We quite often come across customers which we talk to and we say, could you provide your test strategy document to us? And they say, yeah, sure. And they send us a document. Actually, what it turns out to be is a test plan. And a test plan is a different thing from a strategy, but often used interchangeably. So let's make sure we understand what a strategy is and what a plan is. A test plan, is a set of instructions for achieving an objective. So it's the detail. And the reason why Wikipedia, I really like this definition from Wikipedia, is that it links back to the strategy. So the test plan says, how are you going to assure yourselves that you've met the objectives and the priorities set out in your strategy? So already you can see the strategy sits here with objectives and priorities, and the plan sits below it as the instructions for achieving those objectives. So we've got a better understanding already, and later on I'll come back to this and show how those two documents relate to each other. I was thinking in preparation for this webinar how to describe the difference between a strategy and a plan, and the difference between the two. And this came to my head, a story from about 20 years ago where I needed to get across London. I needed to drive across London to see my father, who was in hospital, and I'd never driven across London before. And so nowadays, of course, you would just plug this into your sat nav, but 20 years ago, sat navs didn't exist. I know it's strange to think that now, we rely on them so much, but there was no sat navs. So I had to pull out my trusty paper map of London A to Z, and this was basically a complete maze of roads that chart the way across London. And so I thought I was being really clever, and I decided to plan my route in extreme detail, every single turn, junction, road name, all the way through from where I was to get to the hospital where my father was. And I thought I had a perfect plan. What could go wrong? I'd done it in detail, every single step of the way. So off I set with the map on the steering wheel, as you did in those days. Those people that are old enough to remember pre-sat nav, that's how we spent a lot of our time driving along. And I really like this phrase, again taken from the military, and it says, "No plan ever survives first contact with the enemy." And boy, was this true for my journey across London. As I set off straight away, I hit signs like this. I couldn't go right when I wanted to. I couldn't go left. There was a one-way street which wasn't marked on my map, and no entries. And of course, if anyone's ever been to London, we're always digging up the roads. So there's inevitable road closures. So my plan, my beautiful plan that I'd planned in so much detail, was effectively useless right from the onset. Effectively, my strategy was wrong. You can't drive across London going road by road. It just doesn't work. And what I found was that actually the best way to navigate across London is to go from place to place to place. You just drive and follow the signs to Westminster, and then to London Bridge, and then to wherever. And that strategy works. So another way of thinking about strategy maybe is that it's your approach. How are you going to go about achieving what you want to achieve? So it's a good way of thinking the difference between a strategy and a plan. As just a way of getting that sort of thinking into your head. So moving on, so we know the difference between a test strategy and a plan now. Georgie, if you could start the second poll. So this is a question about why is it important to have a test strategy? So is it to ensure that stakeholders accept a level of risk, or is it to ensure resources are appropriately assigned, or is it both of those things? What do we think? We'll just give people a couple of seconds on that one. That probably needs a little bit more thinking about. And the results are coming in. It's lovely watching the percentages go up. So we've got most people, we've got 90, so both is hovering around kind of 90%. Some people think it's a very small percent, think it's A, some think it's B. So in our view, you probably close the poll there. Thanks, Georgie, for that. I think it's both, and we'll cover off why in the following slides. Hopefully you understand why both of those things are really important in the confirming your test strategy as a document. And the way I'm going to do that is with the help of a little cartoon story, which I'm going to tell you. And it's really highlighting the impact if you don't have a test strategy and it is based on, oh, that was loud, whatever that was. It is based on a true story. So although it's a cartoon, it does have some basis behind it and the risks of not having a test strategy. I'm just going to go. Georgie, I think you need to stop sharing the poll results. Yep, okay, perfect, thank you. I'm just going to come off the camera for this bit so that you can see the screen, full screen. So we're going to do, I'm going to explain the impact of not having a test strategy with the help of Bob, and I'm going to tell you a little story. So please meet Bob. Bob is a test manager who's a test manager at a large global company which has recently started using ServiceNow, and it's come to that time when we need to upgrade it. However, Bob is not concerned because Bob has a big, thick test results report, which shows that he's run thousands of tests which have all passed. Karen, who's the ServiceNow product owner, gives Bob a huge pat on the back for doing such a great job doing the testing. And then Karen reassures the change board and the CIO that the upgrade will be absolutely fine because Bob's team have run thousands and thousands of tests which have all passed. She schedules the upgrade for the coming weekend. All seems to be going fine. However, on Monday at 9 o'clock, Bob gets a call from Karen, who's extremely agitated. The CIO has sent her an urgent email this morning saying that the finance team, who have tried to create the invoices from the timesheets in ServiceNow, but they've all failed. And Heather, who's the finance manager, is calling for the old system to be brought back because she's lost complete confidence in ServiceNow. Even worse, the company's ability to invoice customers has been affected, so the CEO has had to cut short his round of golf to explain to investors what's gone wrong. Bob is obviously very concerned, and he can't understand how this has happened after all of the testing that he's done. He even fears he might lose his job over this. And Karen is really worried because she thinks they may want to go back to the old system, and she really loves ServiceNow. So after the dust settled, some really expensive consultants were brought in by the CIO to review what went wrong, and they concluded that the total cost of the failure was in the region of $360,000. They also concluded that although indeed lots of testing had been done, the risks specific to the testing of ServiceNow had not been fully understood by Bob and his team, and big areas of business critical functionality hadn't been tested. There were lots of tests, but just not the right sorts of tests and not in the right area. They recommended the creation of a ServiceNow test strategy to address this issue. Now, following the review, Karen and Bob spent time creating the test strategy, agreeing this with the stakeholders, and aligning their tests with the test strategy. And a few months later, the next ServiceNow upgrade was successfully scheduled and went without a hitch. Karen and Bob obviously got lots of praise for a job well done. Now, what's interesting about this story, let me just put my camera back on now. So as I said, this story is based on a real situation that actually happened that a customer shared with us. We've changed the names to protect those involved. But what happened was obviously Bob made a mistake because he dived in creating lots and lots of tests, and it gave everyone the false sense of impression that everything would be fine because we had thousands of tests and a big thick test report. But it was effort spent in the wrong area. And really what the test strategy is about is making sure that that effort, that resource, constrained resource, is spent in the right areas and focused on the right things. And that's the real key message from this story. And we'll keep coming back to Bob during this webinar. Let me just move on to the next slide. So we've talked a little bit about resource constraint, and our definition of test strategy mentioned resources and the appropriate assignment of resources. But what the test strategy really is for me is defining a compromise between the risk of the software failing and the amount of resource that you put into trying to avoid that risk happening. So that compromise is really an important thing to understand in defining the test strategy. So you can start to get your head around that by using a simple two-dimensional matrix. On the horizontal line, what's the impact of the risk firing? So what's going to be the result of the risk firing? And on the the vertical axis, what's the desirable test coverage? And really that equates to how much resource are you going to need to put into mitigating that risk. So think of the very high up that line as lots of test coverage, lots of resource assigned to it. At the other end, very minimal. Now, not typically the situation with ServiceNow, but there are software systems that whereby if they fail, it can result in major loss of life. So my business partner and I were involved with a project a few years ago where navigational products were created for seafarers. So the result of a failure in that software could be major loss of life. If on a navigational chart an island was put in the wrong place or displayed on the chart in the wrong place, and the cruise ship bumps into that in the middle of the night, you're going to lose hundreds of lives. So it's very severe. So that would equate to wanting lots and lots of tests done in that area to mitigate that risk. So it's thinking about what the impact of the risk is and therefore what resource you assign to it. Going to the other end of the scale, let's imagine a system whereby there really is no impact of software failure. It's inconsequential. You're going to assign less resource to do that. Your testing is not going to need to be as thorough. And then you've got everything in between. So systems in banking and insurance and healthcare subject to regulation. So they're not as bad as the major loss of life end of the scale, and they're not down the other end, they're somewhere in the middle. But again, it's making sure that you think about what the risk is. This is what your test strategy is about. It's highlighting what the risks are. What are what's going to happen if it does fail? What are the consequences? And therefore, let's assign resource appropriately. So you get some kind of line on your chart that looks something like that. We're about halfway through, I think. So, Georgie, have we got any questions so far that we can pick up?
Hi, Paul. Thanks for taking us through that. Yeah, I've got a question here. How much testing do we need to do for ServiceNow instance that is largely out of the box?
Okay. Yeah. So yeah, it's a good question. Actually, we get asked this quite a lot, so I'm not surprised it's come up. So there's a lot of we obviously speak to a lot of ServiceNow customers on a regular basis, and we're hearing a lot of the times we hear that people are reverting their ServiceNow systems back to out of the box because of the amount of customization and configuration that's done. And I think we do get told quite a lot that there is an expectation that because they've gone back to out of the box, that means that they won't need to do any testing at all because it's all ServiceNow standard. I think that is a dangerous assumption in our view, that even if a system is completely out of the box, if you're operating business critical processes on that out of the box function, then you need to check that it works. For example, the situation we had with Bob, just coming back with that, in that story that we illustrated, the timesheet part of the system may have been completely out of the box, but it was business critical. The revenue was generated in the organization from an out of the box function. It would have been foolhardy not to test that. And in fact, Bob ended in lots of trouble for not doing that. So you can't just consider one aspect. You can't say, well, that's out of the box, therefore we don't need to test it. And in fact, just thinking about it, we're coming back to this in 2 or 3 slides time, where we've got a matrix that will help you determine, when to test something, whether it's out of the box configuration or customized code as against the business criticality. So it's more it's more complex than just if it's out of the box, you don't need to test it. And that our matrix, which I'll cover later on, is a really practical tool for helping you to assess the risk around that and what you need to test and what you don't need to test. So hopefully that helps, Georgie.
Yeah, great. Thank you so much.
By the way, I'm just conscious I've got a timer running down here. I'm just conscious that time's running on. So we'll do some more questions at the end, Georgie, I think, if we've got time. And also, I think you're going to mention later that all the questions and the answers from today during the session are going to be put on our LinkedIn group or something. So I'll let Georgie explain that later. But so don't worry, if you're asking a question and we're not getting to it, don't worry, we're going to get to them all at the end. Okay. Let me just move on to the next slide. A little bit of a sort of practical explanation now around test strategies. So in terms of a quality assurance document hierarchy, what should that look like? I think we now understand where the test strategy fits. So for me, it's a nice explanation to see that the test strategy fits and answers the why and the what. So why are we testing? So what risks are we mitigating? And what are we going to test? So if you think about it, the why and the what, that's quite a nice way of breaking it down. So your test strategy sits at the top of your quality assurance document hierarchy. And as we saw in the definitions earlier, it's about is defining the objectives for your testing. So I've put 4 objectives on here that might be kind of generic ones that you might want to consider for your test strategy. But obviously this varies from business to business. You know, there might be specific areas of your ServiceNow instance that are of particular interest, and you want to make sure that they are thoroughly quality assured and tested. So make these specific to your organization and try and make them measurable as well. So certain levels, you know, if you're subject to regulatory control, you may need to set certain objective measures in as part of those objectives. So those objectives are really important because they feed then down into the test plan. And the way that I think about the test plan is that is the how. So how are you going to confirm that you meet that objective, which is defined in the test strategy? And the test plan then goes on to say, okay, well, if we want to confirm our internal processes, then we need to first of all identify what those key processes are. What are the critical ones? How do we prioritize those? And we'll come back to the matrix later on, which will help you prioritize. And then and only then do you define your test scenarios. And I think the mistake that Bob made in that organization was that he went straight in at this step and he just started creating test scenarios and hundreds of them, and they were all very good in their own right. But what he didn't do was take a step back up and look at what areas were risky, what were the objectives, and then break it down into the test scenarios. So it's a very common thing we come across, is the kind of desire to create hundreds and hundreds of tests, especially when you get into test automation, because test automation makes it possible to create lots of tests and run them over and over again. So, you know, sort of kind of quantity over quality can happen. So, but even with test automation, and probably even more important with test automation, is make sure you're testing the right things to mitigate the key risks. So that's absolutely key. And then you've got the last section, just for completeness, which is the test execution. I think of that as the doing. And for that, you obviously need test data, and you capture the test results that should prove that you've met the objective that you set out to do. So it's quite a standard kind of hierarchy. Obviously, you would go on to do the same for objective 2 and 3 and 4 as well. Now, I've worked in big projects, big organizations, been subject to many audits myself, ISO 9000, all sorts of different internal and external audits. And every time an auditor comes and talks to me as the project manager, the first thing they say to me is, can you show me your test strategy document? So, you want to be able to pull that out, and then you want to say, okay, where's your test plan? There's my test plan. And where's your test evidence? Okay, there's my test. If you have all of those documents, then an auditor is going to be very happy and give you a big tick in the box. And test strategy is not just about passing audits, but it shows that you have control of your quality assurance process and you've got that signed off appropriately. So it is a useful exercise to go through to understand all of this and how it all fits together. So let's drill down a little bit more into test strategy for ServiceNow. So why is ServiceNow different? Why do we have to think differently about ServiceNow in terms of a test strategy from any other platform? The growth in the use of platform as a services, platforms like ServiceNow, has really sort of turned the testing world a little bit upside down, and traditional ways of testing applications aren't really applicable to a platform like ServiceNow. If you were creating testing a traditional application which has all been built from the ground up, say in .NET or C# or something, you've got to test every single part of that application because you've built it all, so it all needs testing. So even things like, you save a record, you need to go and check that the record's been saved. Now, ServiceNow gives us all of those features. That's one of the benefits of it, is that you buy the platform and you expect, it to work. When you save a record, you expect it to get saved. When you change a filter on a list, you expect it to filter the list. Those features are provided, and that's one of the benefits. So because of all of those out-of-the-box features, it means that what we don't want to do is use our precious test resource features that we think should be tested by ServiceNow. So, when you hit that save button, you don't need to test that it's gone into the database. It will have added it to the database. So let's make sure that the focus of our testing is on risk areas, not on testing standard ServiceNow features. I'm sure my team would attest to this, but the number of times we see a regression test pack for ServiceNow, and we've been asked to automate it in AutomatePro, and you look through and you think, well, why are we doing those tests? That's testing standard ServiceNow functionality. ServiceNow will have tested those features. That's their job. And the way that I think about it is that it's when you change something that you introduce risk. It's a phrase that I learned a long time ago, very early on in my IT career, that where there's change, there's risk. If you don't change anything, then it should work. So as soon as you start altering configuration or changing something, then you're introducing a risk that might break. So that's one of the considerations when you're looking at which areas of ServiceNow to test, what's changed. Now, there is a danger here with ServiceNow as well, and we've seen this over and over again, is that ServiceNow is a highly integrated platform. There are many components of ServiceNow which are shared between all of the business modules. So I'm talking here of things like the permissions, so groups and roles, ACLs to control access, email, the email engine. So lots of those components are shared across all of the business functions. So what you've got to be careful of in that respect is that if you alter or make any change to ServiceNow, to one of those sort of core shared components, that could impact more than one business application. So classic example that we actually saw again on a customer, with a customer, was somebody went into the ACLs and changed an ACL rule to do with the change management system. And they went to the change board and they said, this is a low risk change. It only affects the change management module. It's very low risk. Please, can I have approval? Have you tested it? Yes, we've tested the change module. Everything works fine. It's all good. It's all good to go. Monday morning, like Bob's situation, Monday morning, the HR team are raising support cases all over the place because they can't they can't do, raise their requests and things. Well, what happened? Well, it was the ACL. It had an inverse, a knock-on impact on the HR module. So you have to be really careful with ServiceNow because it's so tightly integrated with shared components. If anyone ever says, oh, we're only just making a tiny little change, it's still a red flag. And that's one of the benefits of doing good regression tests using automated testing, is that you're able to capture those adverse knock-on impacts very easily and very quickly. So, but it does make testing ServiceNow and setting your strategy and approach for testing ServiceNow tricky and needs some thought. So let's go back to Bob and help him assess the riskiest areas of ServiceNow to test, because he clearly needs some help in doing that because he got it all wrong the first time around. So I'd like to introduce to you on this webinar today what we're calling the Power Test Strategy Matrix for ServiceNow. And it's a really simple model, we think, but really helps you focus your testing effort in the right areas of ServiceNow. And it's very specific to ServiceNow because we understand the risks in the platform and where problems creep in. So it's based on our experience of this. At the moment, this is a sort of paper exercise or a whiteboard exercise, if you like. This matrix is, but we do have plans to actually build this into our platform in the future. So this would all be automated. So just planting that little seed for you for the future. But for now, open up a whiteboard or a virtual whiteboard as it is these days. And draw yourself two dimensions on the for this matrix. So the first dimension is how out of the box the function is. Now, one of the key things I'm going to say here as well is when you use this matrix, use it by thinking about business processes. Don't think about modules. So don't say to yourself, right, HR, is it out of the box? Is it config or is it customization? That won't work because HR has many different processes within it, some of which may be out of the box, some of which may be configuration or be configured, some of which may be customized. So, and the other reason for doing that is that the second dimension on this matrix is the business criticality of that business process. So again, it's not the criticality of HR or ITSM or ITOM. We think about business processes. So instead of ITSM, think about what's the business criticality of my P1 incident process? What's the business criticality of my emergency change process? Think about it in that way rather than in terms of modules. Otherwise, if you go into modules, you get yourself in a bit of a muddle. So you've got this two-dimensional matrix of how configured it is versus business criticality. And then what you can do is you can plot those individual business processes onto this chart. And let's put a couple of examples on to help see what's going on here. So this process here that I've identified, I plotted on the chart, it's largely out of the box. So we've taken a workflow from ServiceNow. Maybe we've changed some of the data, very basic configuration. So, it's just along here in terms of this matrix, but it's super important to the business. This is Bob's timesheet system. Let's go back to that. It was out of the box, but really critical to the business. It drove revenue. And was a lifeblood cash flow for the business. So it gets plotted up here, and that falls into the must test area. So there would be no situation where Bob wouldn't test that, having gone through this process. And this is something that you would do with the process owners as well. So you can get the business involved in this, and that's really important because it's the business process owners who should say, yeah, this is a critical process, or this one's really not that important. Obviously, you need technical input from the point of view of how configured it is in this dimension, but the business should be saying how business critical these processes are. So that dot gets put into the must-have area. Let's take another example. So we've got a business process here, or a business scenario, which is super custom. Maybe it's a complete custom UI page that somebody's written in JavaScript or Jelly or whatever, but it's absolute custom, but it's a really low business criticality. It's just a feature that's either rarely used or wouldn't really impact the business very much if it failed. So it's low in terms of that, but it's high risk in terms of its configuration. So even though it's not very business critical, we need to make sure that this works, because it's almost entirely custom code, and it would be insane to release something without testing it. So we put that in the must-have area as well. And then you can do that for all your business processes. You imagine, you could do, if you could co-locate, you could do this on a big whiteboard with post-it notes and putting them on, or you can do it virtually. There's different ways, but as I say, we're going to build this into our tool in our future, so this would all be created automatically for you, which would be, I can't wait for that release, which would be really great. So we've got a number of processes. Now, some of them will fall into this area. So we've got a process here, which is sort of, it's got some quite advanced configuration, let's say. It's medium business criticality, so it sort of should test. Now, you might say, well, we should test that. Well, this is where your test strategy comes in. Where do you put that boundary? And it's up for your stakeholders really to help guide you on that. This is the point of the test strategy. It's saying, where do we put the line? Because if there was no constraint on resources, you could argue everything is a must test, but we don't live in that world. We need to make compromises, but what should happen is the stakeholders sign off against those compromises. So you can move these boundaries around. You might say everything medium business criticality needs to be tested. Okay, we'll move those. We're not telling you these are the boundaries. That will vary according to your organization. So you can push those about as you need to in terms of the risk appetite of your organization. And also going back to the the slides earlier where we said, well, where are you on that? The impact of risk, is it's going to kill hundreds of people, or is it inconsequential? So it's a number of different factors, and I think the point about a test strategy is it's not a science. Whenever you're talking about risk, it's there's some grey area, and you need to make some sensible decisions about where the thresholds are. So. But it's what the test strategy does do is make sure that everybody is on the same page with regards to the acceptance of those risks and what will be tested. Now, the other thing you can do with this is, these would be obviously your priority scenarios to test. If there was some time left, then you could work on the should haves or should tests and the could tests. So, and if you get into the sort of test automation world, then you may start your test automation, with these critical ones, and then in the next phase you develop out your automations for the should tests and then the could tests. And of course, the good thing about test automation is that can, your regression test pack can get bigger and bigger, so you get more and more risk coverage as a result of that. So this matrix and all of the information that I've gone through today is in the download that we're going to give you. We're giving you that for for free as part of attending this webinar and as part of expanding the knowledge around the testing of ServiceNow. So we hope you find that useful and the practical way of advancing the discussions around that. That's the sort of main part of the webinar is covered. So I'll just sort of recap on what we've done, and hopefully for those of you who are not sure what a test strategy is, hopefully now you'd answer a bit higher on that and say, yes, you did understand. So we know now a test strategy document defines your approach to testing ServiceNow. Sounds obvious, but that's, we all understand that. It defines your testing objectives and goals. That's a really important thing. It's the why and the what. So why are we testing what we're testing, and what are we testing? What are the objectives? Really importantly for me, I sort of mentioned it a few times during the webinar, is that the test strategy defines a compromise between resources and the impact of the risk. So we know resources are constrained, but it's how we effectively mobilize those resources to reduce the major risks to achieve what we want to achieve. That's what the test strategy does. I think it's super important to get stakeholders to sign off against this approach. You know, a lot of documentation is about getting people to have a common view of what we're doing. If you don't have a test strategy, then how do your stakeholders know, you know, what the risk is and how can they adjust, you know, if they need to. If they want to cover off more risk, you say, yeah, okay, you can cover off more risk. I need more resource, you know, or we need longer to do the testing. So those kinds of dialogues can be had if you have a documented approach. It provides auditability of your QA processes. The test plan will come on to the next webinar. So if you're interested in how you, more detail in how we do the test planning, especially with regards to in Agile world, then come to the next webinar for that one. And hopefully you've found the Power Test Strategy Matrix really helpful to determine your priorities. Any of what I've gone through, please contact us if you want any more details. More than happy. We love talking about DevOps and testing and everything related to testing and ServiceNow and DevOps. So please come to us and have the conversation. We'd love that. Georgie, I think I'm done on my bit. I'm sorry I've used up a bit of your time. I apologize.
No worries at all. That was really good, Paul. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
That's all right. So if you guys at home have enjoyed this webinar and want to keep the discussion going, like Paul said, we have a few things that you're able to get involved with. In October in 2021, we will be hosting the first ever ServiceNow DevOps and Testing Conference. Be sure to follow us on social media because we're going to be posting lots of progress about that and we're really excited about it. We will also be submitting all the questions from today with the answers on our ServiceNow Testing and DevOps group through LinkedIn. Please feel welcome to join this group. It's designed to spark healthy debates, thoughts and discussions whilst keeping us all connected.
Georgie,
and finally,
Georgie, just on that one, are you, because I can't see your screen, are you sharing how they find that group?
I'm not. No, I haven't got that up now.
Oh, do you want me to do it? I'll just do it.
Yes, please.
I just thought it might be useful. Yeah, that's the page there. Yeah, so we've got a ServiceNow testing and DevOps group, and you can find it really easily. Just go into LinkedIn, put in ServiceNow testing. It's the only one that's there. So please join that. Georgie will accept your invite straight away. And as she says, we'll put all of the questions and the answers from everybody. So not just your question and answer, everybody's questions and answers, so that we can all learn from each other and have that great debate. Sorry, Georgie.
No worries, no, that's fine. Yeah, the last thing I was going to say was that the complete guide to testing ServiceNow will be emailed to you guys in a few days, so keep an eye out for that. And I have a few more questions if you're ready for them, Paul.
Oh yeah, I forgot about questions. Yes, I thought it was done, but yeah, go on, hit me with some questions.
No worries. How often should we renew or update our test strategy?
Oh yeah, good question. So from an auditability point of view, if your organization is regulated by ISO audits and other audits, I would recommend that you at least look at your test strategy document every year, because auditors will want to see that even if nothing has changed, that you at least checking that nothing has changed every year. So I would do it every year. The other time I would review it and update it is if there is a major change or a significant change to the landscape, the ServiceNow landscape, if you like. So, for example, if you've plugged another system into ServiceNow, so you've got a new integration, or if you've introduced a new module, so because those are going to affect your objectives and your strategy, you may need to adjust things and adjust the priorities as a result of that. So yeah, so I'd say every year at least from the from a review point of view. and then every time there's a major event or a major change to the ServiceNow landscape.
Nice. Okay, brilliant. I do think we've only got time for one question. Sorry about that, guys. As we said earlier, all the questions will be posted on our group. But yeah, feel free to follow us on social media or visit our website at www.automatepro.com. Thank you so much for attending, and we'll see you later.
Georgie. Thanks, Georgie, for being the host and doing such a great job. Really appreciate that. Thanks, Georgie. Thanks, everyone, for attending.
Bye.
Bye.